So we're going to hear our Bible reading today from John chapter 15, verses 12 to 17. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you. And I appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another. This is the word of the Lord. Peter.
Good morning, would you? Would you please bear with me as we just come before the Lord in prayer. Father, as we consider this day, this Remembrance Day, our prayer is, Lord, that you would speak to our hearts, that you would give us understanding, compassion and love. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Wow, I had not seen that video clip, Only 19. I was familiar with the song, but I didn't know I hadn't seen the actual video that went with it. And I've got to tell you, I was rather touched by what I saw there, because when he was only 19, I was only 17. So it meant that I was in the same army, wearing the same uniforms. I could even tell you that the rifle they carried in one of the scenes was called, yes, it was an SLR, but it was the model L2A2, not the L1A1 that's commonly used. That's how much I recognised him. Sorry? You too, yeah. The thing was, though, being only 17 and not 19, I didn't see Vietnam, and for that I am very, very grateful. Yeah, we sure are. We saw the suffering that came back with that, with our fellow servicemen. In this Remembrance Day, this 100th anniversary, I have, over the last couple of years, struggled to get my head around the First World War. The Second World War was much easier to understand what that was about. But what was it that made this war what it was? How was shooting the Archduke, what was his name, Franz Ferdinand, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and his wife in 1914 in Sarajevo, wasn't it? Sarajevo. What was it about that incident that would spark a war? It was a good excuse. Yeah, I think there was a number of things. And why would Australian farm boys from out on the Darling Downs and places like that muster and respond to the Great Cooee March and go there and fight? And one thing stuck in my mind, that it was called the War to End All Wars. Well, it didn't succeed in doing that, but there was this belief, I think, that this war would be the end of empires as the world had known. That for so long, our history had been plagued by war after war after war after war, and that now was finally an opportunity to rid ourselves of this scourge that had haunted us for well over 1,000 years. Please excuse me, I do need to refer to my notes today, as I want to make sure that as I'm talking about dates and things like that I do get it right. The empires that they were fighting against weren't like the British Empire, in which we existed and actually thrived. There'd been two main empires to that date, as I understand it. One was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, which was the remnants of the old Holy Roman Empire, and the other was the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire was particularly evil and particularly horrific. And I don't think we understand that today. I don't think we have understood that part of European history, of what had actually happened. You see, round about the 600s after Muhammad had come along, the Arabs raced to power. And in the 7th century, they surged across the north of Africa. And they pushed their way up into Spain and into France. There were no less than 540 jihadi battles launched against Western or classical civilization. This is just talking about the West, not talking about what happened in Asia and India and the carnage that went on over there that was far more horrendous than what we had suffered. They were particularly brutal with the Indians, the people of India, who they considered to be not worthy of living because of their polytheism. Whereas because we were monotheists, we were still people of the book, although we were a lesser people. But they were particularly brutal in India. They were pushed through into Africa, and this had been a wretched time in human history unlike any other. 540 separate attacks against our civilization. So bad was it in the first 200 years that we called it the Dark Ages because all Europe did was send its young men to war. They had no time for schooling, for industry, and they lived on the brink of starvation. At the height of this Arab influx into Europe, they reached the town of Toulouse, I believe it's called. Toulouse, yes, less than 100 kilometres. I think it's about 60 kilometres from Paris Central today. Could you imagine that? An Arab army in central France, just less than an hour's drive from the heart of Paris. But that was 721. They were turned around. The wars continued. Battered on all sides, Europe was pushed and plundered and pushed and plundered. They pushed into Turkey, which was at that time the Byzantine Empire. And in 1453 they took over Constantinople, naming it Istanbul. They pushed against Vienna. In Austria, they got that far. In 1683. They had fought against Vienna, they'd fought against Venice, they'd been right up through Italy. And this empire, this Ottoman Empire, existed for three main sources of revenue. It had no industry of its own. It thrived on the industry of countries around it and the taxes they could gather from goods passing from one side of the world to the other. Taxes that would make an ounce of pepper as expensive as an ounce of gold. It survived on piracy and the profits and the taxes that the pirates paid. It survived on slavery and the income from slavery. But it began to crumble, first of all, when Marco Polo. Remember Marco Polo from the history books? Following the rise of the Mongol Empire, he was able to cross over the top of Europe, bypassing the Ottoman Empire that had now been, which was now the centre of the Islamic empires, and set up a trade route with China and India. And so goods could be carried over land, far more expensive to do than by sea. And yet, because they could save those taxes being paid to the Ottomans, it was far cheaper to do that over this long, arduous walk than to try and sail it through the Mediterranean. The next thing that happened was that Christopher Columbus came along, opened up the ways of the sea. And soon, their income out of trade shriveled up. The next thing to go was piracy. And piracy happened up as late into the 19th century. And pirates were right across the world, Islamic pirates. The Mediterranean could not be sailed safely. And in fact, there were 2 Barbary wars fought over piracy. The United States of America was a newly formed country, having finally reached their settlement with England in the 1780s. Now their ships were flying without the protection, sailing rather, without the protection of the British flag, and soon fell victims to Mediterranean pirates. The United States Marine Corps was formed at the turn of the century for the sole purpose of rescuing American citizens being held for hostage for millions of dollars of ransom by Ottoman pirates. And when they sing that song, what is it, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli? The shores of Tripoli was the Barbary War, where American Marines went in and rescued their hostages in 1803, I think it is, and 1815, the second time. But the Muslim pirates were also down in Java. They were even sailing the Torres Straits. They were all over. But Britain was gaining power. And so the piracy was brought to an end. The third stream of their income, slavery, was also dealt a mortal blow during the 19th century. During its reign, the Ottoman Empire had profited from kidnapping and selling over 100 million people. I'll repeat that. They had profited from the kidnap and sale of over 100 million people. Right? 20 million of those people went to the Americas. About 2 million actually went to the United States. The rest were sent into the Middle East and Asia. The journey into the Middle East was far more difficult, and many did not survive. But in 1807, the British Parliament passed a law making it illegal to transport slaves by the sea. By passing that law, they began the end of slavery, which of course, probably the Civil War of America becomes one of the last things. Rarotonga and the restoration of the people of Rarotonga becomes, I think, the final act of international slavery as it was known. But without these 3 streams of income, the Ottoman Empire begins to crumble. It is pushed hard by the Russians and deprived of income. Many of the oppressed people try to shake off the cruel and brutal and more desperate leadership. This then brings about a horrible period in the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century, that went through to 1922 when the Ottoman Empire was finally wound up. A genocide of Central European Christians. Some 6 million people are thought to have been massacred by the Ottomans in that period of time, about the same number as the Nazis took the Jewish lives. But we don't often talk about these genocides. Prime amongst them were Greeks, Armenians, Bosnians, Serbians, Bulgarians. But at the time, this genocide was well known in the Western world. Churches like this one in Australia would have been praying for the victims of Ottoman persecution. And it was in knowing all this that young Australian men went to war. There were a few women, but mostly men in that first war. And they fought for the end of this tyranny. And they fought with the hope of peace. They fought with the belief that Christian people around the world could sit safely in their homes, that they could worship the Lord Jesus Christ, and that they could live in peace. So we get to the war that would end all wars. And Australia indeed played a unique role in that with its actions in the Middle East, particularly, as Lorraine had mentioned earlier, the Battle of Beersheba, where the Lighthorse had charged in. And in fact, Australia was one of the main countries in pushing the Ottomans back through Palestine and into Syria at that time, and freeing that part of the world. I'm not sure that I've got my mind wholly around what was motivating these men, but I think I've got an insight into what it was. They were fighting because they believed. They believed that there was a wrong that needed to be right. But some never returned. For years, their places at meal tables would remain empty. Parents had lost sons. Wives had lost husbands. Children had lost fathers. And legacy was born. Others returned, broken, scarred, never to be able to work or run as they once did. They carried with them the wounds of that war to their graves. Many returned home. And I think that was picked up in that video clip, particularly pronounced with Vietnam, more so than the others. Without physical harm, yet they too were wounded in their spirit. They had seen things they could not forget, experienced fear and horror unimaginable to most of us. They had been haunted by nightmares and memories, horrid memories, for most of their life. Those who went to Vietnam came home without a hero's welcome, but to protests. Without the gratitude of a nation, their suffering was magnified. Many families were touched by this suffering. As I came here today, Gwen shared of the miracle of a father being a smoker during World War I. Fancy that being a miracle, but it meant that he carried a metal matchbox that deflected an enemy bullet and saved his life. Is that right, Gwen? Yeah, that's right. Many of us will have lost people out of our families. Others we will have seen have struggled. Often we will not have understood their struggle. To the day my father died, he would not speak of some of the things that he saw. I remember the last conversation I had with him. There were tears in his eyes. And he said, I have seen terrible, terrible things. Today we remember the fallen. But we would do well to remember the wounded. We would do well to remember those whose wounds we could not see. Yes, please.
It's quite personal.
Yes.
My dad, 39, 45, came home. My sister told me that he made with his best mates, came to home, some of them were in this. He came home with a fondness for Scotch. My sister told a story about him going out to sell her fountain pen that he brought home from the East for her, so he cried, like Scotch. He fathered me. I've got no recollection of him at all. He fathered me, and then Mum saw the wife and dressed him out. One of these weddings was talking about. Obviously, we connected.
Yeah.
No friend of the father. You know, he grew in alcoholism, of course, which he wasn't before he went. He grew up not knowing his son grew up without knowing him. He also met my mother's wife. She was great, you know, she looked after us through back and boarding school, work herself virtually to death, you know. And it was not something to see, like I say,
The wounds were deep. The wounds were deep, and they become generational because those wounds get passed on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It is a very, very real thing. We need to remember the families of the fallen, the families of the wounded, and the families of those whose wounds were never seen, but certainly felt. I want to finish this morning with two verses of the Ode. We're familiar with the Ode. But there's a verse that goes before it. It's actually part of a much longer poem. I wonder if you would stand with me as we read this, as we bring this to a conclusion. They went with songs to battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eyes, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds encountered. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget. Father God, this day, this 100th anniversary of a war that should have ended all wars, we remember those who did not return. We remember those who returned with broken bodies. We remember those who returned with broken spirits. We remember the families that were torn apart by lives that they didn't know how to interact with. Father, we will remember